Hello and welcome. I'm Abha Bakay, and we're going to be analyzing what this budget had in store for startups this time around. A lot was expected. Did the finance minister deliver? To help me answer that question, we've got Ajit Khurana, angel investor, Bipinpreet Singh, the founder of MobiKwik, Adhil Shetty, CEO at bankbazaar.com, Rishi Anand, partner at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, and Milind Kothari, managing partner and head direct tax at BDO India. All of you, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Ajit, let me just kickstart with you because, you know, we had the huge Startup India, Stand Up India event that was counting down, and really that was raising expectations for startups as to what would be expected this time in the budget. I have to say, you know, right off the bat that I'm not sure the budget delivered in terms of funding or incentives, but did it deliver at least along the lines of what was announced in Startup India?
See, in principle, I find that a lot of statements made in Startup India were very exciting, and we were hoping that they would get enshrined in policy by virtue of the budget. I'm not very happy on that count. Let me give you an example of why I feel that way. On the one hand, we are talking about tax exemption for startups for the first 3 years under certain eligibility criteria, which I think very few of them will meet. On the other hand, as per section 56(2)(7)(b, to get technical, we are actually taxing them when they have not even made revenue, leave alone profit, in the format of angel tax. What that means is that if the assessing officer deems that you have raised investment at a price higher than fair market value, you're going to have to pay tax when you raise money from angel investors. This doesn't make sense. Right. It's okay if you were to tax profits when we make profits, but why tax people when they're raising investors' money?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Kothari, I'm going to come to you on this. I'm going to get into the deep end, you know, right at the start. But, you know, the entire taxation debate has been a long-standing one when it comes to the startup community. They've been crying out for parity for a long time. I mean, when do you see some of these, you know, some of these sort of irregularities really easing up and making things easier for the ecosystem?
So this was expected that this relief would be granted and this section would be removed. It was a recommendation that was already there, including by the ISWA committee. Surprisingly, it has not been taken care of in this budget. And on top of it, even the new sections that have been inserted or proposed to be inserted for providing tax relief or deductions to the startups, I think there is a room for improvement in terms of what was the expectations of the community as opposed to what the finance minister has delivered. There is clearly a big gap out there. Okay. Although no one expected that finance minister is going to give money on the table, notwithstanding that, I think there could have been a much better fine print that could have been delivered to the community, I would say.
Adhil, let me bring you in here on the taxation front. Do you feel that perhaps more could have been done, or do you feel that we still saw some element of intent shine through?
You know, I definitely think we saw some element of intent shine through. So, for example, there were two things we were asking for in terms of parity with public stock, right? So, one was the period for eligibility for long-term capital gains, which is currently 3 years for us, and it's 1 year for a public market stock. We were asking for a reduction. The positive is that came through. So, now 3 years has become 2 years. So, an angel investor selling after 2 years is eligible for long-term capital gains. Now, we were also asking for that 20% index long-term capital gains to come closer to, you know, zero, right? Now, I think that obviously it hasn't happened, but I say measure the intent, right? The very fact that they have taken a disparity and looked to normalize it, I think is positive. Building on Startup India, I think we believe that if you look forward, right, we can expect this long-term capital gain for startups to keep coming down, and we think the intent is positive.
All right. Rishi, let me bring you in here. I know you've also been looking at this in a lot of detail and looking at what startups were anticipating. But, you know, I read some of your notes and you've already stated some of these developments, particularly the capital gains front, as dicey. So I want you to explain that to me a little bit.
See, from the taxation perspective, if, you know, they have said that there will be no capital gains on the income made out of, you know, on sale of shares of from the startups. However, the problem over here is that whether or not how this income, when they have also actually made a restriction that while these incomes are non-taxable, but they need to be invested in funds of funds. So what will happen when you make a gain out of funds of funds? So technically, these issues are not so clear, at this point of time. So we need to really see that how the entire budget unfolds in the coming period, because there's a lot of uncertainty right now on these front. However, on the positive side, the 2 points which I would really like to make. One is the unified agriculture marketing e-platform, which again is a very good move if at all is taken in the right direction. It will essentially help farmers and e-commerce companies to build up a platform where the farm produce can directly be taken to the consumers or to the retail stores or probably to the wholesalers. This will actually eradicate the entire mandi system. However, there will be a lot of amendments that will be required to made at the different state level in the APMC Acts. Second, another positive move which is there I see, again, in the transportation sector, we represent number of clients who are into transportation sector, essentially aggregators, okay? People of likes of Uber, Ola, Zipgo, people like them. If you see that there are no set of regulations at this point of time which actually governs any of the aggregators of transportation services. That is something, if government comes up with a regime where these startup companies, there are no more startups, but again, these aggregators of transport services can be brought into the legal regime, and there is a set of rules which may define them as as a business, and they can function in that form.
All right, fair enough. So that's one pocket of the market as well that we're looking out for, that further few more regulations, in fact, were possibly missing that we needed some clarity on. Let me get Bipin in as well at this point. Bipin, coming from your standpoint, when it comes to the financial technology space as well, what did you feel the finance minister did manage to do for the ecosystem, and what did you feel was lacking?
I think, I'm not sure about today's announcement, but I think a few days earlier there was news that digital payments or electronic payments would not have any surcharge or would not have convenience fee, especially, government institutions, who are, or any kind of institutions who are, today disincentivizing customers for collecting payments in the form of electronic payments, or even merchants, sometimes which ask for 1% or 2% for customer to pay, whether they are paying offline or online. I think if that happens, and if we remove the service charges or the convenience fees, at least for the, the entities which come under the purview of the government, that's a great welcome start, because remember that in India still 95 to 96% of all bills are paid in cash by people who are going into and standing in queues, and I think giving some kind of, at least leveling the playing field with cash, goes a long way to do that. The second, I think the big news for me is, especially for fintech, all fintech startups and companies as well as banks, is the news about Aadhaar, which is going to get the legal status, and I think that's a very big development, because over the past 2 years since this government came into power, there have been many discussions, and there have been many debates, and there was slight confusion on what is really going to happen to Aadhaar, and would that really form the basis of identity of about 1.2 billion Indians. And I think if it gets legal status, I think it will go a long way to provide financial inclusion and financial services to billions of Indians, because that's one big roadblock that every financial company faces today. So I think these two for me were the major highlights. Of course, as an entrepreneur, as a startup entrepreneur, I cannot expect, every single announcement to, cater only to startups. We are a country of 1.2 billion Indians, millions, hundreds and millions of farmers, and I think, the country needs to develop also. At the same time, we just cannot keep expecting, SOPs for startups all the time.
Fair enough. Although the word startup and entrepreneur were used several times in that budget speech today, not necessarily always in the context we would have liked, but taking that digitization point forward, Adhil, I want to bring you in here as well, because you were talking about this earlier, and I think it's important to note that along with perhaps acknowledging some amount of some amount of steps that were required on the taxation front for the startup community, the entire Digital India program as a whole is starting to take shape, and that, as Vipin was also mentioning, has larger implications.
Absolutely. I think the intent was again displayed in the budget, right? So there's statutory backing for Aadhaar, which is a big deal because a lot of eKYC runs on top of Aadhaar. There was also a mention, right, of a digital depository where university degrees can be placed and managed as a secure document. I think the thought process saying, how do we enable electronic verification? How do we create a depository? How do we make Aadhaar statutory? Are all the right intent, right? They're all thinking about how do you democratize finance. And I think that even though these are in the small print, like the digital depository, it's a big, big deal, especially for fintech startups.
All right, we need to take a very quick break. We'll come back and continue to analyze what this budget means for startups and the community. We'll be back in just a moment. We'll look at it both from a legal, taxation and, of course, sentimental standpoint.